information that allow them to understand what is otherwise a difficult topic to understand and make a reasonable decision. And that's why we're going down this route. So, yes, I did look at other agencies, but what works for one county may not necessarily work for the next. You have different judges, you have different court systems, believe it or not. And so I'm doing this because I think it's what's going to work here.
That's all for now.
I'd have one further question. You basically have the fine being what, $100 and then $250 and then $500, whatever it is. I guess my question is, there's certain events, et cetera, where, fine, I'll pay the $500. Just cite me every time. $500 isn't a prohibitive amount of money, depending on what the cause of the noise is. Is there any? What do the other jurisdictions do if you just sort of have a chronic violator to whom, say, $500 would be an inconsequential fine?
It's not something we would like to do because it creates problems, but it's something we can do, and we've done in the past. We'll actually seize the noise-making item as evidence and remove it and book it into our evidence room. Therefore, there is no more noise.
Okay, I guess we can always come back and revisit that if that turned into a problem. Hopefully it won't. Hopefully somebody would say, well, I don't want to go back through the experience.
Yeah.
Well, sorry. Also, if you look right above that, on right above the fines on subdivision C of 9.02070, you'll see that that's a pretty standard statement we put in here, which says that all violations of this chapter constitute a public nuisance, which in addition to or in lieu of any other remedies in this section, and the remainder of that sentence refers to the fact that you can proceed under the code compliance public nuisance abatement, or in lieu of other remedies means if you do have a chronic problem, you can go to court. You can go right to court as a public nuisance.
Okay.
Too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think that was also a question that Supervisor Callaway had asked over the weekend about code compliance. Yeah, this was intended to be for the sheriffs to enforce, but that does say that this is a public nuisance that can go through code compliance, but I'm not sure whether that would be an effective way to mitigate noise impacts from parties, etc. Whereas opposed to seeing someone in black with a gun might be a better way to deal with that. That was the intent.
Well, that had been one of my many questions that I sent to you and Jim. On designee, it just refers to the sheriff's office, and I was wondering if there at some point we would want code enforcement to be able to help. And Jeff, I did say that we best talk to Jeff White first. So I don't think I CC'd you, but...
Well, they would be able to under that code section I cited. They don't need to be a designee under this particular chapter. This chapter is separate and distinct from the nuisance abatement code. So that would be a different type of enforcement that could be instituted by the county. This is solely intended for the sheriff to deal with the issue.
Okay, Gary?
I got a couple questions. I'm looking at the table 1 on page 4, and I'm looking at the dB levels. Are those from Placer County? Are those from other counties?
One table
where you
is
set those levels at? On
what?
Page 4, table 1.
The first table is from Merced. The second table is from Placer.
And can you, how loud is 65 dBs? How loud is 70 dBs?
That's good.
I would just add before we have an expert testify that our general plan currently references 65 at the property line. And I don't know if there's any intent to change that. That's pretty standard throughout the state, but that's what it currently says.
Would that be similar to a semi-truck if you're standing on the side of the road going by you? Would that be equal to maybe 65 dBs? Or
I'm going to have Richard explain the noise to you. I think
before he comes up, though, I got a couple questions for you.
Sure.
How long do you anticipate, Jim, Captain, for a measurement to take if an officer comes on site and determines that, yes, there could be a possible violation here, I need to take measurements? the approximate time it would take to get the accurate measurements. And then this is all quite technical, so there's going to be some training for officers here. How many officers do you anticipate need to be trained for this? And then how long does the training take? And is there updates that they have to continually take over the course of the years?
Okay. Your first question is, depending on the type of noise, it can either be taken as long as it takes to get the kit out and get the device assembled and measure it that fast, or if it's a long period of noise, and again, Richard explains this much better than I do, you can take a sample for a section of time, and that sample could be anywhere from, I think, 10 seconds up to, in certain areas, they take them for multiple hours. They leave fixed stations. We're not going to get into that. So it just kind of depends on what the noise is and the circumstance. The deputy may have to walk a distance or go talk to people, so it just kind of depends. Your second question was training.
Yeah, well, how many officers do you?
We would train everybody, all of the deputy sheriffs. We would basically train everybody in the department that's sworn that actually works enforcement activity. That would be conducted with our routine training, which is already scheduled. Most of the manufacturers provide training with the equipment. There is also a copy of a process that I have from Placer County, which is their department's procedural process on training, calibration, and that would be relatively easy to follow. We would probably train on it somewhere between annually or biannually, but the calibration would have to occur more often.
How long it took for this training for the officers to be able to go out and utilize it out in the field?
Richard, what did you tell me it was? An hour? Half a day?
Half a day training. Okay.
And I looked at the device, and I have to tell you, while this is very technical sounding, the device is actually really easy to operate. It's not a very technical device whatsoever. I have actually some paperwork. I only have one copy, though. I'll be more than happy to give it to you to look at.
And will there be a standardized form that they fill out?
Correct. It'll be similar to our citation, most likely. It depends what piece of equipment we go with, but it'll be similar to a citation or a small report, depending on the crime. If it's a misdemeanor, our officers are required to actually write a police report. If it's a citation, they issue a citation and they write their report on the back of the citation.
Thank you.
I'll do some of mine. On fines, is that money that will go to the general fund, or is the sheriff's office asking to keep it, or that's a separate issue? I just think we need to add, not maybe in the ordinance, but it needs to be clarified.
Sure. I would recommend that the fines go to the general fund.
That's good, thank you.
Begrudgingly,
That's
but I will.
fine,
Can I finish
Writing that
up?
down.
that's fine, writing that down.
I would see Dennis in the back.
When it comes to recouping the sheriff's costs, though, when it comes to actually recouping the sheriff's costs, if we get into that, I would request those go into the sheriff's.
So the administrative costs would go to the department conducting the
All right.
business.
On page 3 and elsewhere, in the word endangers, as I mentioned, seemed a bit over the top to me. You know, walking in a dark alley in the city is endangered, but I'm just not sure why we're using that word.
That was language used by other counties. It was standard language. I mean, I could debate the danger of somebody not being able to sleep and then having to operate equipment, but I don't think that's what you're asking me to do.
No, because we talk about disturbs. Again, I want the board to know that appeals do not come to the Board of Supervisors on this. If anybody wants to appeal a citation, it cannot come to the board like we dealt with the code enforcement issue this morning. So that had been one of my questions, because the board, always likes things to be appealed to them. This is not one of those items that would be appealed to us.
Well, I think traffic citations should be appealed to the Board of Supervisors.
I do too. On page 3, I think we
Did you
already
get a
talked
ticket,
about
Tom?
code enforcement.
I'm sorry.
On page 6, I think Janice answered that environmental health will not be involved in this. Page 6, that first long paragraph. Because I wasn't clear if environmental health had to put together policies and procedures, but that's going to be scratched from this. Is that correct?
That's the board's request and direction.
Well, that's what I thought I heard
Right.
council say.
That's just a copy with no changes whatsoever to accommodate this particular county, only because it was in the ordinance. I don't like to rewrite from scratch, so I figured if we were going to address pleasure boat noise, we'd start from that. But I don't think it's our recommendation to add that into the ordinance at this time.
Okay. On page 8, number 4, I asked if there could be examples, like ambient temperature is out of the range of tolerance. I mean, this is going to be, I found this very technical and not easy to read. I mean, it was really directed towards the sheriff's office versus towards users, and I just, maybe,
That's actually part of the second alternative sound measuring procedure. Right. There's 2 in there. There's an ABC, and then there's the alternative, which is much longer. They both. There's a plus and a minus to both ways to go. Making it short and simple can work, but sometimes having it longer and more detailed can also work. At this point in time, I'd leave that up to the sheriff's office to decide.
So
which
if
one's
anyone
best.
wants clarification of if a member of the public calls and wants clarification on this ordinance, we would send them to the sheriff's office.
Well, first we have to pick one of these alternatives to put into the ordinance. And we've not discussed which you would prefer. Obviously, that's up to you or the expert. And then, yes, how it's measured would be going to the people who have been trained.
On the citation that's issued for the first violation, I thought board direction had been the first time it would be a warning. That wasn't clear to me, Captain.
Actually, that was what I discussed earlier, and that was the sheriff's office recommendation, maybe with board concurrence or support. It's not our intent, and I was going to close with that, to go around and issue a bunch of people noise citations. This is being done to be used as a tool in order to gain compliance with problems that are currently we're unable to control. There may be a time when we may issue something right off the bat because it may be so egregious and so obvious, or it may be in concert with another arrest or another issue. But to clarify our intent, this is we don't want to run around issuing a bunch of noise tickets, nor are we going to be able to be responsive to all of these. But it's a compliance tool that will allow us to basically do our job in a much more quick and efficient manner, instead of repeatedly going back to these noise problems or noise calls.
So if you have noise on Forest Service land, Bureau of Land Management land, state park land, do we enforce that? I mean,
It would
I get a
depend.
call from you get a call from the state park.
It would depend on the totality of the circumstances. Lawfully, we could. However, if there is another remedy already in place, or another process that needs to be reviewed, or it's being disputed, or it's not very clear to us, then we would defer to that other remedy or that other issue until we knew that we had not only the right to enforce, but that we were rightfully responsible to enforce that. So it's just going to kind of depend. I mean, I understand your question, but it's very broad, and I would, without being there, looking at all the circumstances, I can't tell you which way the discretion is always going to go.
Okay, well, each of these groups have their own peace officers.
Correct.
So you have something at the Forest Service land, they have their own peace officers. Do we say, well, you have to respond first and then we'll respond? I mean, this is a low priority, but,
Yeah, generally speaking, they're responsible for their land, so they'll respond to it. If they are unable to, or they need some sort of assistance, then we, will support them in the same manner we do California Highway Patrol or the police department. So, but ultimately, each agency has its own jurisdiction, and therefore they are responsible for that jurisdiction.
well, I understand. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and you know where I'm going,
I do.
but forgetting that. I have a lot of U.S. Forest Service land in the Ebbets Pass area,
Correct.
and they have one peace officer,
Correct.
and she can't be all over that Forest Service land.
Correct.
So do we say that she has to respond first? And
Yeah, if it was, Supervisor Callaway, if it was a one-time issue that she was unable to get to, we would obviously respond and try and deal with the issue at hand. If it was an ongoing problem that the Forest Service was well aware of, that's not going to stop today or tomorrow, then therefore
but the
they would
question
respond.
then is, this is Calaveras County's noise ordinance,
Correct.
not the Forest Service or the state park.
Correct.
But the noise is generated on state land or federal land. Do we respond? Do we enforce this on their lands?
We can.
Can or cannot?
We can. Should
Can.
we choose, we have
Okay.
discretion to do that, yes. The entire county of Calaveras, this ordinance will be enforced.
Good luck, Arizona.
So, I mean, I'll get back to that one later. If you have a motel and a bar, both commercial, the motel's complaining because of the music at the bar past 10 o'clock. Who trumps?
That's a very common call that we do get. Generally, time permitting, calls permitting, we'll show up, contact the reporting party, listen to their complaint. If we have time, we will go over and contact the other party, either anonymously or let them know who the party is, depending on the reporting party's request. Let them know of the issue and try and work it out in a non-criminal fashion, non-enforcement fashion. If the person says, hey, we're going to continue to play, we go back to the other, the victim, so to speak, or the reporting party. We explain to them, look, you're staying in a hotel next to a bar. I know you're unhappy, but unfortunately it's not reasonable to issue the citation. Here are your options, and we lay them out some options such as citizen arrest and the stuff I went through in the April study session, and then we give them kind of a choice as to what to do. But as far as us taking the initiative and issuing the citation and seizing the band's equipment to mitigate what a noise that somebody should have known going into, that we wouldn't be part of that.
But as you stated, that is a reoccurring complaint. So it doesn't matter that the bar is making the noise because they're making it this week or next week, and it might be different bands or different venues. That issue's still there, and this doesn't.
Well, I said it was a common call, not necessarily a reoccurring complaint. That's a very common call that we get. It doesn't necessarily relate to hotel, but it relates to anything. So, but if you were, I guess, if you're trying to get this, are you trying to say that this is something that goes on all the time at the same place? How would we address it? Is that what you're asking?
Well, if you have the bar next to the motel, and it's a reoccurring call or complaint, I'm not sure how you define that. And so we know we're going to get the call from the motel about the bar, 5 times a year.
But let me
So
interrupt
how
her, because we talked about this, and we tried to draft something with respect to bars, and we decided to just exempt legal existing commercial uses. So remember that? So bars, if they're legally existing, they're not covered by this ordinance. There's a specific exemption.
So they don't have a decibel thing that they have to meet after 10 o'clock.
No. It says right there under the exemption, sound from existing legal non-conforming uses or existing permitted commercial uses which do not significantly change in existing on-site activities or result in a change in the number of days or daily hours of operation.
Okay.
So if you want to change that, you need to give us direction, because we had a little bit of difficulty figuring out how to deal with there's so many different situations, it's difficult to draft an ordinance that covers everything.
I understand.
But I know,
bars-
we did talk about specific situations, probably the one you're talking about.
So that segues into the ag zoning, where they have permission to have events. It's an existing permitted use. This would not apply to
This
that.
doesn't cover anything that's authorized by the zoning code. They are authorized to have a certain number of events. If it goes over a number of people, they're supposed to get an administrative use permit that will have conditions on it, or a CUP if they go over it, that will address sound impacts.
And we can mitigate those issues. That's why we were in support of that one section I think Supervisor Tryon asked about. If we know an event, a historical event, is having a problem, we can place conditions on those permits to try and mitigate those problems, or we revoke the permit. So that's why we support that permitting process.
But if it's a permitted use, it's exempt. So the ag community better be careful what they ask for if they want to change the zoning code.
And
Just thought I'd tell you
that's under
that.
review.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to open it up to the public at this point. Again, we'll take any questions or comments. Questions will be answered. I know I still want to hear from the technical person, Captain Macedo, but I think I want to open it to the public before we ask him to speak. Is that all right?
It is.
Thank you. Yes?
A couple things I just want to note before we close. I do have some cost estimates for the devices. We did not get into that. The costs for the devices are expensive. They're looking at, and again, this is a device that will hold up in court that will measure what we need. I'm going to say approximately $2,900 per device. Another thing that I just wanted to make the board aware
How
of.
many devices do you anticipate needing to be able to effectively enforce this code?
Obviously, we would like the entire patrol staff to have them, but at that cost, it's just not practical. So I think what we're going to do is have them checked out per shift. So I'm looking at about 5 for a total of roughly $14,500, which is not ideal. And I realize that that's a great expense in these times. Something else that I do want to make the board aware of, we do have some private partners in the county, such as Lake Comanche, that have their own rules that are already enforced under the county ordinance. And they do have a noise ordinance out there. It's a very simple, non-decibel-based noise ordinance that they do enforce. I brought some copies of those. And they use similar hours as to the hours we discussed here today. They have a lot of problems down there with noise. This ordinance is enforced quite frequently, but something that they have that we don't necessarily have is they have the ability to kick people off their grounds if they don't behave. We can't necessarily kick people out of the county if they don't behave. But generally speaking, when you go there and tell them that they're going to have to pack up and leave, they don't always get a citation, but some do. So there is some existing noise already covered under the penal code and within the county.
Thank you. I'm going to open it to the public, and then we'll come back to Captain Macedo. And please identify yourself for the record.
Hi, my name is Candace Lopes. I'm from Copperopolis. And I just had a couple comments and questions, I guess. For the lake noise ordinance, I would.
Did you have a question?
Your name again?
Candace Lopes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. For the lake, I would request that the board treat land and lake water noise ordinances in a completely different fashion, considering the differences that land and water, the sound waves carry over them. Also, if we were going to go to a decibel-based rule on the lake, what's the distance that the sheriffs would be going, like, and using, or just see how with the decibel meters? I don't exactly know how loud the decibel meters are that they're currently discussing, but I know land and water is extremely different. Also, for the land, just a general question that came up into my mind. for the warnings for the noise ordinances and things like that, would it be warnings per day, per weekend, per week? I mean, would it, I don't know exactly.
The board's direction had been per incident, because you
Okay.
can go to the same house 3 times. So the first
Per
time
week or per month
No,
or
per-
any time?
you get a call, I mean, that's kind of the direction we gave.
Okay.
You get a call, we go to where you are and say, cut it out, we're getting complaints, and we leave.
Okay.
And then we go back that same night or whatever next morning. That would not be per week.
No,
In
I
terms of
understand. And then
finding, but
for
that's a
homeowners,
good-
sorry, excuse me.
No, it's a good point for us to make sure we define that. Thank you.
You're welcome. I also, for renters in the area, I just had a quick question also. Would this be per if it was rented per week or per 30 days or whatever, and you attended that person, would it be that person cited? Okay. I think that's it for now. Oh, I also want to make a comment that for Tuolumne County, I'm going to the meeting next weekend regarding the lake ordinance for the 100-foot rule. I've already collected over 300 signatures opposing this ordinance. We just started as of last Thursday. I've spoke to Russ Thomas twice now about this issue, and I think that a lot of youth is getting a lot more involved because it's directing us as a targeted group, because it's kind of more targeting towards the wakeboarder youth, which I understand, and I understand some of the language is offensive in music, and I'm not here to defend that whatsoever. But if it were to go forward with the lake noise ordinance, is there any way, how do I find out if you guys are going to be discussing that further to get more people involved and come and speak and things like that?
Well, today we are going to be discussing this further. The captain and county council have both asked that they just saw Tuolumne's today, so they haven't seen it. They haven't had a chance to review it. Are you asking that we not have a noise ordinance on the lake?
A
Or
daytime, I am opposed to a daytime lake noise ordinance, yes. But I am not saying that I don't think that there should be a reasonable, but I'm speaking just from Lake Tulloch because that's where I spend pretty much every weekend, every summer. I think that it's very frustrating coming from, since I've lived there my entire life, having homeowners come and enjoy a beautiful area. I completely understand the attraction, but half the attraction is having a recreational lake. It's on every, real estate agent, things like that are advertising this as a recreational lake, and to start coming down and almost micromanaging every little thing. And I just feel like it's a very targeted group. And I understand that there are, I don't know.
No, thank you for the clarification. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to address this topic or ask questions?
Hi, my name is Janet Ostroff, and I am a resident of Hathaway Pines, adjacent to the Candy Rock Quarry. Some of you are probably familiar with the situation out there, and I'm not addressing that particular situation today. I just have a couple of questions regarding the noise ordinance. There's really no reference or definition to impulse noise or repetitive impulse noise, and I question whether that is going to be included, the possibility of that.
Okay. And the other question?
Well, it's a little bit of a comment as well on repetitive impulse noise. I've done a little bit of research on other county ordinances, and impulse noises are measured differently in terms of decibel levels as far as what is allowed. And some ordinances reduce by 5 to 10 decibels repetitive impulse noise, because this is according to Stewart Acoustical Consultants, Norrell Stewart, PhD. Such sounds must be several decibels quieter in measured sound level than normal sounds to produce a similar amount of annoyance. However, and then he goes on to say that that gunshots must produce a time average of 12 decibels less than more common sounds for the same annoyance. So my question is, are we going to address this issue in the noise ordinance. My other question is if an officer, and this is probably for Captain Sato, so if an officer comes out and measures with his sound measurement and the decibel meter registers lower than whatever we decide in the proposed ordinance is acceptable, however, the officer might be, due to the quiet community, might see that there is a noise disturbance. What happens in a situation like that?
Okay. He'll answer those questions after we take all questions.
Okay, so that's,
Thank
okay, and then let me just see if I have one other thing. Okay, I guess I was looking for more clarification of a noise disturbance,
This is good. Thank
something
you.
more specific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Billy MacArthur, may I ask a second question this morning?
You can ask 10 questions.
Thank you. I'm not aware of how many actual offenses get called into the sheriff's department for noise. And my question is that going to balance out with the expense of the equipment? And if in fact we do agree to, if this ordinance passes, and we do agree to spend maybe $14,000 on this equipment, is that going to come out of reimbursement from the general fund? Will that be left specifically with the sheriff's department to cover that expense? And really what I'm after, not that I'm opposed to it or even for it, I just want to know that that expense balances with the amount of offense that there may be out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy.
May I?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. My name is Peter Riggs. I'm from Valley Spring. I just have a question maybe you can explain. Is waterways, navigable waterways, are they under federal jurisdiction? They are.
We'll answer the questions at the end, Mr. Reeves.
Okay,
Is that-
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
No,
It
it's
was
a-
just,
So, federal water, all navigable waterways is under federal control. You have all these federal and state forests and land use is not in your jurisdiction. But if you choose to, you can take and enforce certain county rules, jurisdiction other than yours. And did I understand clearly that you might encourage the local sheriff department to enhance and enforce federal rules instead of requiring them to enforce it? Because if you want, there might be one signature, maybe can be produced that certain federal laws be enhanced and enforced if you decide to introduce yourself in those issues. And Arizona is a perfect example. Okay? Did the board ever thought about encouraging dispute between neighbors that they take advantage of small claim court? Because there, the requirement of proof and legality is not as strict as what an officer will have to do. But plus a small claim court judge might be able to settle things without the burden of cost of proof that the county will assume. And is it a possibility there might be some little neighborly war going to start? Every time somebody passes gas, they want to have the officer come down and take account of pollution or something, okay? So are we opening up a bag of worms over here? Is that really what we want to do? But if we do encourage neighbors to, officers can respond. So it's avoid any further escalation of the disagreement. But maybe they should encourage them to take advantage of the small claim court way of settling things that's available. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rees.
Terry Baker, and it's regarding the rooster problem and the noise regarding that, which is not going to be addressed today in this meeting. So my question would be, if the sheriff doesn't enforce the noise nuisance animals, who does? Mary Mutz and the Ag Resolution Committee? Are they the ones that prosecute, or are they the ones that give exemptions to people who have been convicted and ordered to abate? Because that's what the Ag Resolution Committee under Steve Walensky and the Board of Supervisors is doing. They're hijacking everything that goes through under the nuisance animals. And back in, when was it, July, when we were here for April? Mr. Machado was saying that a lot of people don't like to turn in complaints because they get retaliated by their neighbors for turning them in. Well, we turned in a complaint based on this form right here. It worked perfect. Took them to court, got them cited, got them convicted, and that was 3 years ago. And she's been in violation of a public nuisance ever since. That's because it got hijacked by Steve Walensky, Jim Jones, Mary Mutz, and the rest of the agricultural people. It's not up to them to enforce the codes. It's up to the sheriff's department. And I have no idea how this can be turned over to some lay people, have no enforcement of anything. You turned it over from a judge who convicted her, who gave her a mandatory sentence. And you took it away from us. And you told them that they can voluntarily do whatever they want. If they want to voluntarily be nice to us, they can, voluntarily. But they're not. Because Jim will even tell you, they will retaliate to you if you just turn in a complaint. What do you think they're going to do when you get someone's wife convicted, ordered to abate, and then you guys tell them to just forget about what Judge Moaney said and just do whatever you want? What do you think they're going to do to the neighbors then? You think they're just going to be nice to them? I don't think so. This was dated 5/10/2007 is when we got this. This was faxed to us from the sheriff's department. Please read the top. It came from Animal Services to me. They told us how to abate this noise. And we went through this, and we did everything they said. We filled out our petition, everyone in the subdivision, went to court, got a conviction, and we've been being tortured ever since because of the Ag Resolution Committee. They going out there and telling them everything's fine. Hey, those coops are just fine, even though every one of them needs an administrative use permit. They're telling them it's noise. Don't worry about the noise. Bob Garamendi's saying, well, how are you going to know about the noise? How do we know if the noise bothers you? Well, let's read the law. It says, if it interferes with the reasonable amount of comfort and enjoyment of life and property by any considerable number of persons, constitute a nuisance under this section. That's the law. Why don't we just go by what we have? Because this has been destroyed. We can't even get it. This was the last one I believe they gave out, and then they turned it to this. They took the law completely out of the whole enforcement. This is what it reads now. And it has to be approved by Mary Mutz? How does that happen? Honestly, how does that happen? Now, she refused to abate this noise. She refused to. She didn't appeal. She just didn't do it. And you guys are protecting her. Every one of you have been protecting her. This has been through the board, and you've all voted to protect the roosters. Well, what about the innocent victims? You know, there are victims here, and we've been being patient as we possibly can. But there has to be some type of an enforcement, and it can't just be nothing. I have a lot more to say, but you know what? I'm just going to leave it at that. You guys are letting this person commit a misdemeanor on a daily basis. We'd appreciate it if you put it to end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Is there anyone else who would like to?
Joe Kelly. To answer that gentleman that was questioning the navigable waters, with the stroke of a pen, it can be changed. Navigable waters is under the Clean Water Act, I believe, of 1972, federal jurisdiction, but that is changing. They're redoing the Clean Water Act so that all waters below ground, above ground, you spit on the ground, will belong to the federal government. It's going to be interesting to see how the state and federal government deal with that. In my personal opinion, this noise ordinance should be called the selective noise ordinance. Now, under A, it talks about the excessive noise is a serious hazard to the public health, welfare, and safety, etc., and is contrary to public interest by interfering with restful sleep. Wow. Communication, relaxation, the full use of one's property. Paragraphs B and C further emphasize A through redundancy of A. Now let's go down to the thing that wasn't discussed, was the definitions. Let's look at noise, which is M. Means any sound of such level and duration as to be or tend to be injurious to human health or welfare, or which would unreasonably interfere with the enjoyment of life or property throughout the incorporated area of the county. N, noise disturbance, means any sound that A, endangers the safety or health of any person, B, disturbs a reasonable person of normal sensitivities. This states an ordinance for overall noise protection, but reflects a discriminatory regulation, to boats on the lakes and private parties. Remove all the government speak flowery words. One thing I have to look at is in the concept of what we're going to be coming up to of sustainable communities. Are you going to allow chicken noises and chicken manure into state or federal waters in the future? What effect will this ordinance have, as an example, on Supervisor Tryon's truck with an application of his jake brake when towing a fully loaded trailer being used for the transportation of agricultural product? Same question applicable to a 10-wheeler, agriculture or non-agricultural based, fully loaded transportation of product. Does this ordinance accept the entertainment noise? Now, Mr. Walensky brought up something about in some canyon and the people. But I'm going to bring up, and I don't particularly have a problem with the noise from up the hill. I don't hear it where I'm at, luckily. But from up the hill, that can be heard in the bar 20. This question is legitimate, but for noise distance reference. So once again, it goes back to how far does the noise carry? And if you're not going to have it, if you're going to have it here for the locals on the lake, but you're going to say, well, because you have a permit and you do this periodically, your noise can come way down the hill. Well, it doesn't make much sense to me, but that's okay. Where does this document reference all the other documents that affect noise? In particular, sound of the 1970s manufactured boats with wet headers. Is there a noticing of baffle requirements? Now, these 1970 boats are hanging around a long time. They're still being bought and sold all throughout the state of California. And as we go along in life, they're changing from what the boat originally came from to a much more horsepower, increased performance motor in them. So these add to the noise. So how are you going to go about doing this on the county's portion of that lake? Is there a baffle law on wet headers, or are you going to say you can no longer bring a wet-headed boat into this area? Where does the Sheriff's Department stage its weapons qualifications? Is it subject to this ordinance? Or is there going to be a different weapons qualification site that is noiseless to the community? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Are there any other questions or comments on this issue? Okay, I want to bring it back to staff. Jim, if you want to address some of the issues, I know we all would like
I'll
to
answer
hear
some of
from
the
Mr.
questions, and I
Craig.
do want to have Mr. Craig up, yeah.
Yes, please. Thank you.
The first question, and I apologize, I was writing quick, but I didn't get everybody's name. The first question, where would the measurement take place from on the water? That would be from the party that complains property line, as indicated in the ordinance. I think you answered already that the renters would be the ones issue the citation, not necessarily the property owner. And I do want to clarify, we are not targeting Lake Tulloch. This ordinance would be enforceable upon any lake, and this county ordinance is being written for the county as a whole. We have no desire to target any particular area or lake. We do know of ongoing, reoccurring problems, but to specifically say that this ordinance is being utilized or drafted to target any particular area is not the case. The impulse noise or repetitive impulse noise, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that, ma'am, but I can tell you that I did check specifically, and the sound meter does measure gunshots, and I had a very short but concise demonstration put forward to me on the measurement of that. What do we do if the noise level does not raise above the dBA? I believe, is it Osteroff? Am I pronouncing that correctly? Yes. What do we do? Well, we would obviously be prohibited from issuing a citation at that point because we know, in fact, it would be held up in court. So if time permitted, we would go over and contact the person causing the noise and try and resolve the issue by speaking to them and saying, this is what's going on, you're close, you're not in violation. Can you shoot somewhere else? Will you shoot somewhere else? It depends on the circumstance, but that's normally what we do on any, even if it's a party call, regardless of what it is. And if it was gunshots, the first thing we do is look and see where they're shooting and what they're shooting and make sure they're not a convicted felon in possession of a gun, that type of thing. So we do look for other avenues to resolve issues. We don't just look at the particular issue at hand. We try to be problem solvers. We're not always able to do that. But if we know you're having a problem and we can't get it solved one way, we will try and look at alternative methods to solve the problem.
It's not working, Jim.
Okay. And the question regarding how many calls do we get a year and do they balance out with the cost of the equipment, that's actually a good question. And I went over that a little bit in April, and I didn't have a chance to dig my stats up. But we do have a numerous amount of calls, and what we are looking at is staff time, the amount of staff time we are going to save to not have to repetitively go back to these same types of noise calls. So I would imagine, I don't have a time frame in which this equipment would pay for itself, but when you're looking at what a deputy sheriff makes per hour plus the records processing and all of that, the dispatching, I would imagine these things would pay for themselves relatively quickly in reducing responses to noise calls, at least repetitively. Our waterways under federal...
Just a second. One of Billy's questions is, where does the money come from? It comes from the general fund to purchase. Now, it's up to negotiation. Captain Macedo wants to keep a certain portion, and so does the board. But, I mean, that was one of your questions.
It was.
Thank you.
And I didn't have it written down, but I didn't skip over it intentionally.
Oh, no, right.
Our waterways under federal jurisdiction, not as it relates to the noise ordinance. All of Calaveras County, regardless if it's a waterway, would fall. The ordinance would be enforceable. Small claims court and trying to seek encouragement between neighbors to talk again. gentleman's still here, but we always encourage neighbors to talk when we get any type of neighborhood dispute. We'd actually like them to talk before they call us, because sometimes when we get called, we're seen as being a weapon or being used or being sent or on another neighbor. So we always encourage that. We always try and avoid criminal enforcement on these types of things because, as the board well knows, some of these neighbor disputes can become very problematic. With respect to neighbors and retaliation, we do see that, and I mentioned that in our first study session in April. The one thing this tool does give us is we do not have to have a victim sign a citizen's arrest form and basically assume all civil liability for us taking an enforcement action, which is where we're currently at. We can take the measurement, process a report, and enforce the noise violation. With regards to Mr. Kelly's selective noise, again, we're not targeting the lake. I know excuse me, that the lake was brought up today, but nothing could be further from the truth. We have numerous calls regarding house parties that eat up an incredible amount of time, and those do not occur at or near the lake, while some do. And we're anxiously looking forward to being able to solve those particular calls, especially when you're looking at a deputy sheriff having to travel up to a half hour to respond to a noise call, and just when they get back to a second call, turn around and go back. Jake brake noise, I'm familiar with that. That is a separate ordinance that is not covered under this ordinance, and again, that would relate back to the deputy's discretion. Most deputies are aware that there are such things as an ordinance relating to the term referred to as Jake brakes. And then,
That's not a county ordinance, though.
no,
That's a
no. A city or county could adopt an ordinance, and as far as the motor vehicle code goes, that's a separate issue. I think what Mr. Kelly was referring to is if you drive in a certain jurisdictions, you'll see a sign as you enter the jurisdiction restricting air brake noises, or engine brake noises, excuse me.
But that would only apply on county roads. It would not apply on the state highways.
It would apply wherever the ordinance related to the Jake brake was enforced, the jurisdiction for which it was enforced under. So if a state highway went through a city and if it was adopted in the entire city, then that section of the highway that's not what we're here talking about.
But we don't have a Jake brake.
Correct. I'm just trying to explain the difference,
All right.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you.
I made reference to several other documents, and I think Mr. Kelly wanted to know where those were found. Those were all found in the county code. In the interest of time, I did not read all of those county codes that were referenced in here. There was a question about, I apologize, I didn't get it completely written down, specific to citations already relating to boat noise, and I can't recall the term he used, but had something to do with boat motor noise. There are existing laws under the Department of Boating and Waterways that are enforceable that relate to that. This ordinance is not intended to dilute those or strengthen those. This is separate in addition to. The final question I had was regarding where do we do weapons qualifications. We do those on a remote ranch area, and we also use a range over in another county that is operated at an academy. So it just kind of depends where we are at. And I'm thankful to say to date we have had no complaints about our range qualifications. But
Okay. Candace, did you have another question? Gary thought you had another question. Could you please come up? Thank you.
In response to that answer from the complaint of the house to the lakes, are you going to have a Marine officer come out and cite the people out there in the middle of the lake, like playing their music at whatever hour of the day, if they're finding it offensive or too loud or things like that? And then
any citation issue is going to have to fall within the guidelines, within the elements of the ordinance. So it's going to have to comply with the specific elements of the ordinance. Because we contact them the first time doesn't mean they're immediately going to get a cite. Most likely we'll get a warning. If we have a victim that is complaining and it's something that generally speaking has been going on and we can't mitigate it, then we will move a draft, so we're looking at other options. If you're speaking about citing somebody without a victim, so to speak, just the marine safety officer arbitrarily taking it upon him or herself to issue a citation, they can do that. Currently, it has nothing to do with this ordinance. They can't do that under the Department of Building and Waterways, just as though a deputy sheriff or hired patrolman or police officer can write you a ticket for any fault under the vehicle code. So they can do that. But I can tell you this ordinance, the idea behind this ordinance is to prevent us from having to go to reoccurring problematic calls that do not fit under the current existing county, state, and federal laws. It's not specific to target any one particular person or particular area, and we specifically wrote it so it benefited the county as a whole, as opposed to just one particular group that's having a problem with motorcycle riders or gunshots or this is a broad law. It's not a specific law.
I'm not opposed to the county noise ordinance whatsoever. I'm more just speaking towards lake, considering the sound just carries so differently over water. And I guess, is the marine officers going to be equipped with decibel readers as well? Is that going to be in your budget for the noise decibel readers and things like that?
Yeah, they currently already have those.
Okay.
But they don't use them all the time. Typically, they're out of date and they develop under the old Building and Waterways law. So as far as the ones that were purchased from here, if they're dealing with a particular problem or they need to borrow them, sure, absolutely, they can borrow them or check them out or whatever you want to call it. They could very well do it. It's just going to depend on whether they need the tools to take care of an issue.
Okay, but that's not under the current budget of the new decibel readers that you guys are trying to equip in the
Well,
vehicles?
we're looking at purchasing at least 5, and those would be open.
Just for the office?
No, they would be open to anybody in the department. They
Okay.
would end up on both for months or half a year if that was the case. But,
Okay.
it's going to be on an as-needed basis.
Okay, and then I just had one last comment for the board regarding the homeowners on Lake Tulloch. Speaking from my parents had owned a home for, I don't know, I've lived there my whole life pretty much on Lake Tulloch. And is there any responsibility when you go to buy a home on a water that you know has noise? And is there any responsibility to take buying a home on the water and then complaining about the noise that was pre-existing to you moving there? Is there any type of responsibility that homeowner needs to take on its own rather than, it's like moving next to an airport and complaining that you're having multiple traffic coming to and from and the noise of the airplane?
Or roosters or cows.
Exactly. Everything. I mean, I think it's a general consensus when you move somewhere, you should be checking your surroundings before you decide you want to come